Today, we're talking about every bit of time travel in Ben 10. The concept of time travel has always sort of been a big part of the series, from early inclusions like Ben and Gwen visiting their future selves in the episode Ben 10,000, to all the goings-on surrounding the Doctor Who stand-in, with Professor Paradox come Ben 10 Alien Force, and then the many inclusions of time travel in Omniverse. All of this resulting in what is the most universe-altering time travel shenanigan that completely flips the origins of the show on its head, with both Paradox and Ben travelling through time, affecting the inciting incident of the series. As per my usual structure for these videos, I'll be covering the time traveling classic, then the alternate Alien Force era, before really getting into it with the big swings come Omniverse, with a few bits and pieces out of order muddled throughout as I see fit. Just a bit of admin up top. This was a particularly tricky video to title, seeing as we have a Ben 10 character cold paradox, but we make do. More generally, particularly in narrative-heavy series that aren't so episodic, time travel can be a super interesting element to follow, if sometimes a bit muddled. And in typical Ben 10 fashion, the series in its many iterations approaches time travel quite differently depending on series or even really episode. While there is an ongoing story, a lot of classic Ben 10 did lean into the more episodic storytelling, with a more overarching story just surrounding it. While Alien Force, for the most part, did really feel like one episode led to the next, apart from a scattering of more self-contained episodes, the series really built as it went on. Then Omniverse more so had a balance of both, and in that very typical Omniverse style, blending the best of both classic and the UAF eras with its own little spin on things. Particularly like we'll see in Omniverse, where those time travel plots start to overlap with one another, creating duplicates of characters going back over the same events, and in two instances that immediately come to mind, end with the reveal that these events will loop back around, meaning the inciting incident of the time travel also ends up being the later resolution to all of it. I hope I'm not talking myself in circles here. What I'm getting at here is time travel affects each show in very different ways. So let's actually get into it. Classic series introduces the idea of time travel in a big way, with right after a huge win for Ben, besting both Kevin and Vilgax and briefly unlocking Master Control, in the following episode, the soon-to-be-revealed future Gwen casts a spell going back in time to kidnap her past self, or a version of her past self, we'll get into that, as a way to lure our 10-year-old Ben to the future, as a way of knocking the edges off of a future iteration of Ben, now going by Ben 10,000, the hero of heroes, who I've made a more extensive video on, covering who really is the real future Ben 10,000. But back to it, this future Ben now needing to reconnect with his humanity, as well as Gwen and Grandpa Max. This future Ben functionally isolating himself from everyone around him. In a bit of a Batman sort of way, he's crime fighting in the most efficient way he sees as possible, and like we got a glimpse of earlier, using Master Control to remain in his alien forms, cycling through them as necessary, usually remaining as Accelerate so he can get around the planet easily. And this episode shows just about everything a Ben 10 fan could ever want. We get this future version of Gwen who has this fantastic design, all the charms of Bazelle, and just feels like the natural progression of Gwen's character. And this version of Ben who, while he does start the episode with a bit of a chip on his shoulder, is for the most part kind of everything Ben's ever wanted for his future self, particularly after he reconnects with himself and sees the value in his humanity. Using that humanity to counter a future Vilgax who, following Ben 10,000 butchering him in a previous fight, leaving him, I guess, lifeless, is restored and given a new more powerful body thanks to another future big bad in Animo with this amazing new Yeti body. Again, feels very much like a natural conclusion for his character to reach. What I was trying to get at there before I went down a bit of a tangent is that Vilgax is back with a body that is custom built to counter all of Ben's now 10,000 individual alien species, with Vilgax being able to react to and have an answer for each of them coded into him. But, and on theme with this episode, isn't built to counter him in his human form, which swapping in and out of is what does him in at the end, that along with Spitter and Arctiguana. Following the episode's character arcs and Ben 10,000 reconnecting with Max and Gwen, there is an episode continuing the events of that timeline with the episode Ken 10, where we see more future versions of these characters, including Kevin 11,000 and Ben's son Ken, but that's not really all that time travel heavy as much as it just is a continuation of that timeline and what we'd seen before. There's also the enormous Omniverse retcon to episode 1 of the classic series, but we'll get to that later in the video. Moving on to Alien Force, and we've got the introduction of Professor Paradox, the Doctor Who stand-in I mentioned earlier, who brings time travel to the show in a big way. Following a time travel experiment in the 1950s, thinking there may be some involvement at a military base from the DN aliens, Ben, Gwen, Kevin, and later Paradox team up to work out what's going on with this seemingly unstoppable monster, which when that said monster makes contact with anyone or anything, it ages it, like we see from the fossilized animals, and what it does to Kevin, Thankfully for Ben, Chromostome wasn't auto-affected. And thankfully for Kevin, Paradox changes him right back to normal. On that, let's get into Paradox's character a bit before we wrap up the events of the episode. Following the experiment gone wrong in the 1950s, Paradox ended up being stranded in time for 100,000 years or so. No longer being able to age, sleep or eat, he just existed there, and in his words, went insane for a while before getting bored of that and regaining his sanity. Then learning everything there is to know about space and time, applying that to travel across time and becoming a bit of a hero himself, defeating, in his words, thousands of enemies and saving the world, again in his words, hundreds of times, citing that at some stage he has already helped Ben save the whole universe. So for Paradox, this initial meeting isn't his first time helping Ben, and the events he's talking about are presumably the ending of Omniverse. Again, we'll touch on that towards the end of the video. Back to the events of the episode, the team going back in time to the event that created Paradox, after working out that that creature isn't acting so strangely, and he's going about the place like a regular person would if they'd woken up finding themselves trapped in a military base, only if that same person couldn't communicate and aged everything it came into contact with. Quick mention, I really like the look of this creature. Back in time, the team realises that following Paradox getting sent through that portal that trapped him in time, his assistant wasn't all too far behind him and would end up also being trapped in that portal, becoming that creature. That is, if Gwen hadn't destroyed the portal before he became trapped. Back to the present day, and that assistant, Hugo, now lived those 50-odd years out normally. Paradox then walking the now older Hugo through a more intentional portal through time to go explore together. So a bit of a blend of things here. While the events of the episode are, for the most part, self-contained, Paradox is weaving in and out of the story at different points in time, unrelated to the events of the series as they play out for us. Later in Alien Force, following Ben and Kevin hacking the Omnitrix, resulting in Kevin's more materialistic amalgam form, Gwen decides to go back in time to prevent Kevin from mutating in the first place, using Hex's Book of Magic to do so. Paradox even making a brief appearance to warn against all this, but Gwen's pretty set on doing this, so he just heads off. Right before the explosion goes off, time stays still apart from the two Gwens who have a nice little chat, our Gwen leaving the past Gwen to sort things out. When she returns to the current day, Bellwood, their hometown, and where most of the series takes place, has now been taken over by Hex. I'm glad they went with Hex and not Vilgax, since whether or not Kevin and Ben hacked the Omnitrix, Ben would have defeated Vilgax either way. If anything, it probably would have gone more smoothly without having to collect the runoff aliens following that explosion. Now in this current apocalypse, Paradox pops up and lets Gwen know this is all her fault, and that this is a result of Kevin not being mutated at the time, not being powerful enough to take on Hex and Charmcaster, meaning they won and took over Bellwood. Kevin now in this timeline being controlled by Charmcaster as another rock golem man, and Ben being captured and for whatever reason, assumably magic related, stayed as Spider Monkey while restrained. Oh, and the implication that this timeline's version of Gwen was killed by Charmcaster before our Gwen came in. This all ending with, like I discussed earlier, this Gwen travelling back in time right before the explosion, now with three Gwens having a chat, and our Gwen wakes up to things as they should have been. And a brief mention of Ultimate Alien before we finally get into Omniverse during the tail end of the Agrigor arc, right as the team's entering the Forge of Creation. Out of the infinite white void, the 10-year-old classic Ben steps out, immediately getting into an argument with his future/current Ultimate Alien self. It's actually a really nice contrast between these two Ben's personalities with how far our Ben's grown since then. Grown in maturity more than anything. Our Ben trying to communicate while younger Ben is throwing out headbutts and deciding future Kevin needs to be set on fire on sight. Really fun moment here, especially the return of Tara Strong as a younger Ben, and Heat Blast vs NRG, which I'm particularly fond of. Not a lot to it. Our younger Ben lends a hand against Agrigor, but doesn't do all that much other than incidentally give Kevin the idea to absorb Ben's Ultimatrix to stop Agrigor. Oh, and the more time travel aspect of this, our UA Ben doesn't remember this happening, so there's that. Paradox pops in, our young Ben saying he knows since the current Ben doesn't remember this, that he won't remember this. Paradox letting him know that he'll think this is all a dream, but, and important to Alien Force moving onwards, from this, it'll subtly influence that younger Ben to know to trust Kevin in the future, leading to Kevin joining Ben and Gwen as a trio. I'd almost forgotten to mention the UAF era Ben 10,000, Eon and everything surrounding that. We won't go too far into it, but definitely worth touching on. In the appropriately titled Ben 10,000 Returns, not so surprisingly, we have the return of Ben 10,000, along with the villain Eon. Following a conflict between those two, this Ben 10,000 returns to our time period, meeting UAF Ben, letting him know he isn't the future self he met when he was 10, but that he is the real future version of him, and that he remembers meeting that version. Again, I have a whole video on who the real Ben 10,000 is, and not to spoil it too much, but it's not that one. Skipping ahead a bit to when one of Eon's helmets is removed off of one of his minions, revealing a parallel timeline version of Ben, with the then more exciting reveal that Eon himself is a parallel timeline Ben 10,000, who, following his Omnitrix getting destroyed and surely some other bits and pieces, became Professor Paradox's evil counterpart. Him since travelling around timelines, absorbing various Bens, wanting to eventually replace the Prime Timeline one, becoming the only Ben anywhere. And finally, let's get to Omniverse. And before the Time War kicks off, and it feels relevant that we've just gone over Eon, we've got the episode Ben Again, with Eon making his Omniverse debut, coming in and swapping the minds of an 11-year-old Ben and our current Omniverse Ben. Again, it's a nice showing of how far Ben's come as a character, especially highlighted by literally being trapped in his younger self. Gwen and Rook doing an absolutely excellent job at managing an 11-year-old in Ben's Omniverse body. From all of this, Eon gets a hold of the key to the multiverse before both Bens transform into clockwork, blasting him with these dueling time rays. Paradox explaining that now with Eon gone, time will start to correct itself. And right as things are wrapping up, Ben 10K, or Omniverse's Ben 10,000, steps out of a portal, telling us that the Chronosapien has gone rogue and that there's a temporal beast on the loose. And around that, and really getting into it now, the Time War is getting out of control. Jumping forward a bit, we have the two-parter, and then there were none, two, and then there was Ben. Following the team up between Big Bads, Vilgax and Eon, and a group of evil Ben variants against Paradox and a bunch of good Bens, all revolving around No Watch Ben, not so surprisingly being a Ben from a universe without the Omnitrix. Following the detonation of a Chronosapien time bomb, keep that in mind, it'll be important later, but continuing on, Vilgax sets off the time bomb in No Watch Ben's timeline, erasing every Omnitrix user and their respective timelines. Thankfully, right as our Ben was getting erased, the Prime Timeline Ben, he gave No Watch Ben his completed Omnitrix. From there, this Ben and Paradox go about the place, repairing different time streams, and here's where we get that huge series-altering twist. Paradox and No Watch Ben enter our Prime Timeline, right as the original Omnitrix was coming to Earth during episode 1 of the classic series, and Paradox lets us know that due to the damage to the time stream, our Prime Ben would never find the Omnitrix. The pair of them interfering, leading to No Watch Ben as Cannonbolt, hitting the Omnitrix, changing the direction it was heading in, right towards our Prime Timeline Ben, leading to the beginning of the series. And that's kind of the inciting incident from the show, really nicely lining up with how the device did suddenly change directions originally, and this really is the standout time travel shenanigan for me, and the real reason I made this video in the first place. Back to the No Watch timeline, and this Ben turns into clockwork, reversing the time bomb, restoring everyone back to life, and the now group of Omnitrix users absolutely lays out Vilgax in this phenomenal sequence. Moving on, the setup here is that there's some alien artifacts in Bellwood that get the attention of some villains. To throw a spanner in the works, we've got the inclusion of former love interest and future wife to Ben 10,000, Kai Green, along with the appearance of Spanner, who will turn out to be their son Ken, who's come back in time to get involved with things. The villains I mentioned earlier being Subdora and Exoskull. You might remember Exoskull from the first appearance of Ben 10,000. The episode revolves around this MacGuffin orb that everyone's after. This all ends with Spanner returning to the future with the orb to a delighted future Kai who hadn't seen it in however long. The big moment here is that Exoskull and Subdora take the mechanism from the orb to Maltruant, who's now gotten what he calls the key to time itself. Maltruant being the evil Chronosapien that Ben 10,000 mentioned in Ben Again. This is all slightly out of order, but I want to group these two episodes together with another Kai-centric episode. We've got the main cast chasing down another artifact, and when they do find it, Paradox makes an appearance letting us know that after they first defeated Maltruant, I guess in the future, they divided him up to parts and hid them all over throughout time and space, hoping that Maltruant's followers wouldn't be able to get hold of them ever again. On that, Exoskull makes an appearance as one of Maltruant's followers and takes off with the artifact. Following this, in the Mad Mad Ben World two-parter, Ben 23, a parallel Ben and Prime Ben come to blows with Subdora and Exoskull, while in the background Dr. Psychobos is working Maltruant, and in the conflict Maltruant's chronocog gets activated, sending us to Mad Ben's timeline. We won't focus in on this one too much, it's an amazing two-parter, but as far as time travel is concerned, they're after a key. All of this culminating in Maltruant getting his powers fully restored. We get this great combination between the two Bens using Ben 23's version of Upgrade called Technobumble with Ben's Clockwork to try and get back to their respective dimensions. No luck on that, but Rook does rescue them using a dimension-hopping Mr. Smoothie, and really getting to the tail end of things here, we have the episodes Let's Do the Time War Again, The End of an Era, and finishing with A New Dawn. so you can probably see why I skimmed over the events of Mad Ben's timeline, but on that I would be keen to talk about that more in a future video. We are properly into the Time War now, and let's do the Time War again. We really get into that time loop I was getting at earlier. We've got a Time Beast and an Eon on the loose running amok, Eon stealing the Time Beast eggs with the intention to give them over to Maltruant. Things getting particularly messy with the inclusion of Paradox and Ben 10,000, the pair of them fighting Subdura and Exoskull, while Ben and Rook go after the Time Beasts. On that, Ben's gravitak against the Time Beast ends up creating a black hole, destroying everything, but before it takes out our main cast, Paradox and Ben 10,000 rescue them, travelling back in time again. No more black hole, but Eon does end up getting away with 2 Time Beast eggs for Maltruant. And then in the end of an era, starting off in Ben 10,000's future, we get some really great future stuff. Love seeing these older versions of the characters, Rook especially, and the inclusion of the main trio's future selves. Really nice to see the future Kevin looking just like the classic series Kevin 11,000. Then we get the great face-off between a future Kai, Ben 10,000 and Gwen against Maltruant, really showing off just how effective a Chronosapien can be. Our Prime Ben pops by, joining the fight alongside Spanner and Rook. This all ending in Maltruant getting away, escaping through time, leading to the final episode of Omniverse, A New Dawn. It's all led up to this, quite literally. Maltruant is making his way through time using the Time Beasts like horses or huskies. Ben and Rook make chase, ramming into Maltruant, knocking him and themselves off course. I think the year we're given is 1773 and the pair are greeted with George Washington. There's some faffing about with zombies, which is a bit of fun, but more importantly, to answer Maltruant's distress signal, a young Vilgax appears on sight. I never really considered his age, but I didn't think he was quite as long-lived as this. As a thank you for his help, Maltruant hands Vilgax that Chronosapien time bomb from the And Then They Were Blank two-parter. Nice little explanation and callback for that one there. There's a confrontation between Ben and Vilgax, and here's where Vilgax becomes fixated on the Omnitrix, so another big moment here. I'd be curious what Vilgax would have ended up being like had this not happened. I know he was already a tyrant, but I wonder where exactly his character would have been by now if he wasn't so fixated on the device. Following that, Maltruant makes his way back into the time stream, followed by Ben and Rook, them eventually reaching this black void, confronted by the Quantumalia ship from the beginning of Omniverse. They make their way through the ship, eventually meeting the Quantumalia, them appearing to Ben as Mr. Smoothie, them taking the appearance of whoever the viewer sees as most influential. A fun joke, but it seems a bit wasted for them not to look like Max here. Keeping on that, Maltruant sees them as copies of himself, while Rook sees them as his father. The point that they interrupt the Quantumalia here, they are right about to conduct an experiment that would create a new universe, that presumably being our Prime Timeline universe. This coming with a reveal that the Annihilag, the device that went off at the start of Omniverse, not only destroys universes, but makes them if there isn't one already there. And Maltruant here is going to use a modified Annihilag to create the universe in his image. Maltruant activating the device before Ben launches himself at it, the Annihilag goes off, Ben catching it, cycling through alien forms, eventually settling on feedback, rising up and blasting Maltruant with the explosion, making him break into pieces, Paradox appearing on scene explaining that this is all one big loop, and that he'll now go spread the pieces all throughout time, only for Maltruant to have to perpetually live through all of this forever. And that's where we'll end things. If I've missed any time travel moments in the show, let me know. This one's a bit longer than my usual videos, but I hope you enjoyed it irrespective of that. And if you've made it this far into the video and aren't subscribed, please consider doing so. Either way, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for watching.